Chapter 12, Coach Carter's Funeral. I started to pack my bags to leave. Ricky grabbed my hand. I pulled away. He said, "Please hear me out. I apologize for all that I've said and done to you." I said to Ricky, "I'm just fed up at this point." He said, "Please let me prove to you that I can be the husband I'm supposed to be." I said, "Actions speak louder than words." He said, "Would you please hear my mother out?" I said, "Why does your mama always have to come to your aid? If you hate me, she hates me. If you love me, she loves me. I would rather not." He called her anyway. He put her on speaker. She said, "Jay, you know my son loves you. Jay, there is nothing he wouldn't do for you and those kids." I said, "Except for quitting his job, cursing me out in front of the kids. We are homeless, for Christ's sake. With all due respect, I don't want to talk." I left the room. Ricky said to me, "Why won't you just talk to her?" I said, "When we first started living at the salon, I called your mother to see if she could help us out. You hear her say she doesn't have it, but I can tell you what I want for my birthday. Freaking an Additive set that cost $100. I have too much going on to deal with her pleading for you, but you can't help our whole family. I'm getting prepared to attend this funeral, and now they just announced that we have now seen cases of this virus in the States called coronavirus. Y'all president didn't want to take it seriously in November. I got a call from Dr. June. She said, 'Hey, do you have some KN95 mask?' I said, 'No, ma'am. What is that?' She said, 'Sis, this virus is real, and you are getting ready to catch a plane. I need you to wear a mask at the airport.' I got another call. It was Auntie Pat. I said, 'Sis, let me call you back. It's Auntie Pat.' She said, 'Okay, but remember, a mask, and I will have some KN95s for you when you get here.' Aunt Pat said, 'Hey, niece, did you see the news?' I said, 'Yes, ma'am.' She said, 'I just want you to be careful in the airport because of this virus. You're carrying that precious baby.' I said, 'Yes, ma'am.' We got off the phone. I said, 'Don't want me in an airport with this thing going around.' My husband chimed in on my conversation and said, 'I've been watching the news too. You have to be safe.' I said, 'This is a lot already. I'm getting ready to see my father.' I went to the bathroom and I started thinking about how we repaired our relationship when I was 27. I thought about how my father had caught a bus all the way to LA, from LA to St. Louis for my wedding. Ricky and I were supposed to get married on August 31st, 2012, but it was so full of drama. Ricky called the wedding off. My dad had been in St. Louis for almost 4 days, and the day before he was leaving, I picked him up and took him to Walmart and got him some snacks. I said, 'I'm glad we got you some snacks because the bus trip is 3 days.' My dad said, 'I know.' I pulled into my grandparents' house. I went to give my dad a hug goodbye, and he said, 'We need to talk.' I already knew what he wanted to talk about. I didn't want to do it. I was okay with faking it until he left. I said, 'We don't need to talk.' My dad said, 'No, you need to get out everything you feel about me.' I started to cry. I said, 'All my life, I had this image of you, and I'm still affected by you beating me in the bathroom.' He said, 'You don't remember.' I said, 'You can't tell me I don't remember you putting me in between your legs, beating the left of my face.' He said, 'I wasn't beating you. I slapped you.' I said, 'How many times?' He said, 'Enough.' I said, 'Enough to where I was blue and purple in the face at 18 months old. I have lived with people talking about how loud I am if it's on purpose. My hearing is impaired is from you and the rest. My mom painted that picture. I hated you and never knew you, but you showed me who you were, yourself, the very first time I came to live with you. Not the next day, the same day I arrived there. You made me read a book.' He said, 'Yes.' I said, 'And I couldn't say ultimate. I kept saying ultimate. Instead of understanding, I really didn't know how to read. You made me do knuckle push-ups. Once you got frustrated with me doing those wrong.' He said, 'And?' I said, 'I was 9. You should have done the push-ups first if you wanted me to do them correctly. But instead, as my knuckles bled, you grabbed a belt and then beat me as I went down. You got so mad. anger turned into rage over the word and continued to beat me. From that day forward, it didn't matter what my mama said, whether you knocked out her teeth or not. I didn't want to be nowhere near you. I thought I was going to be a daddy's little girl, and instead, I was your punching bag. My father looked at me and hugged me and said, I'm sorry. Even though this was weird, it was much needed, he said. Daughter, you need to get some counseling because you're really hurting inside. After that night, I decided to go to counseling. I went and talked to our youth pastor, JC. He told me I made the first step by recognizing I had a problem. He said, biblical counseling shows you how to forgive and heal God's way. I said, I'm angry. He told me through this time, you and I will uncover things you keep putting a Band-Aid on. He said, just because you cover it up doesn't mean it's not there. I knew then God needed to heal me. I needed to be healed. I had been to conventional counseling before as a child, and it didn't help. But when you see your patterns are generational, you need Jesus to break those generational curses. Ephesians 6:12 says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, and against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. I knew I would not be able to see my father to this day if I had not been for biblical counseling. From 27 years old to now, 36 years old, my father and I talked at least once a week. We actually had a pretty cool relationship. We always talked about the churches we went to, or in his case, got kicked out of. My dad attended a mega church in Los Angeles, and Beyonce was there. My father took a picture with her. He sent it to me. That did not look happy. He said her whole team made a big deal about the picture. They called the police on Dad and they wanted him to delete the picture. After that, he told me he was kicked out. He said, I went to that church for years and sang in the choir. I still couldn't believe they put me out of the church. I told you about these phony Christians. I said, you need to see some real Christians that operate with the anointing of God. He said, all church folks are phony. I said, well, I'm not. Are you going to quit going to church? He said, no, I will find one that I'm supposed to be at. I said, well, I'm just happy that you're going to church, Baba. I got a call from my dad one day. He was so excited. He said, I go to this new church called California Worship Center. I said, that's what's up. I said, thank you, Lord. He said it was actually a new church. Not just for him, but for them as well. I looked up the name and it said Erica Campbell. I said, no. Why did it have to be Erica Campbell from Mary Mary's church? I know how my dad thinks. I said, Dad, they are not phony. I just prayed he didn't mess this up because their music had got me through some of the toughest times in my life, as well as their TV show had taught me so much. He didn't have cable, so our weekly conversations were literally talking about Tina and Erica and Warren and Teddy. He would ask me questions like, do you believe they're real? I said, yes, sir. He said, why? I said, Dad, TV can't control God. The whole family, they really love God. He said, oh, I love their mom. She treats me real nice and hugs me at church every Sunday. But on the other hand, he was frustrated because he couldn't get a solo to save his life. Yet he was on the praise train. I tried to tell Dad, you got to do it for the right reasons. You can't switch to gospel just because the worldly music didn't make a name for you. I understand spirits and God sees and knows your heart. He said he also joined the men's group. That made me happy. He talked about how cool Teddy was as a man of God, which also taught me not to judge a book by its cover. My dad hated a cheater, and I had been cheated on by my husband. Yet, he could see the good in Teddy. He could see what God was doing in Teddy's life. We didn't get to see the prayers Teddy led in church or him in the men's group in church. TV didn't show that part of his life. It only showed what he did wrong. My dad actually talked to me about the real Teddy. Also showed me that God was nowhere near done with my husband. The question was, can you stand? Can you stay in position when you are going through hell? I remember the time he told me he fell down the stairs at church in front of everyone. I actually started crying. This was my dad. And I couldn't imagine my dad, who had been doing martial arts all his life, not being able to stand. I hated hearing stuff like that. Just like the time when he got ran over by a car and didn't tell me until 3 days later. While he was still in the hospital, when I saw it on YouTube, it broke my heart that it was my actual dad. The video showed the person backing up real fast. At the same time, my dad was riding the bike, going across the street, then boom. And the bike and my dad fell. The accident was just as my dad was still dealing with the pain. The settlement that should have stopped my dad from being homeless went to child support for his 30-year-old kids. I don't even know where the money went, but it didn't go to us. I was just happy he found a good church home. He said he was giving this choir a year. I said, Dad, you cannot put a time on what God does. But who wants to listen to their daughter? No one. Nevertheless, I wasn't ready to see my dad hurt like this. This was his oldest brother. I wanted to be there for my dad. I knew I had to be there for my brother. Uncle Reggie was his father to him. And my great aunt Pat was really hurt. They lived right up the street from each other for the longest. Aunt Pat was my grandmother's baby sister and the last sister. This hit the whole family from every side. Uncle Reggie died on the 21st of January, but we couldn't have the funeral until the 8th of February because all of our families was flying in from everywhere. St. Louis, Tampa, Philly, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and Japan. At 5 a.m., Granny picked me up from the salon. She already had Aunt Pearlie and my grandpa's sister, and she took us both to the airports. When we got there, Cousin Deborah was there with Auntie Lulake. She was my grandpa's sister and Auntie Deborah's mom, and all of them was going to Japan. I said, are y'all really sure you want to go to Japan with everything that's going on with this virus? I looked over to Aunt Lulake, who was reading the Bible. She looked just like my granddad when I took a picture of him like that. So I took a picture. I posted them both on Facebook side to side. Aunt Lulake said, we are visiting my granddaughter who was in the military. I said, that's good. I started laughing when we all started boarding the same flight to LA. Aunt Pearlie handed me some of her homemade peanut brittle. I said, that is my favorite. I was happy to have this moment and travel with my family. Once we made it to LA, most of the airport flights had been delayed due to the fog. I walked with my aunts to where their next flight would be. I hugged them, told them I loved them, and that they prayed for me. Aunt Deborah told me to tell my dad hi. I told her I would. I walked down to my gate and I saw a food tray set up with all the packages. I mean, good food. They apologized for the delay and the fog wouldn't let us leave. All the TVs in the airport had Kobe and Gigi's funeral. No one complained. We all understood. My heart prayed for all the families of John and Carrie Artabelli and their daughter, Alyssa, Christina Moser, Sarah Chester, and her daughter, Peyton, and Ara Zobian. To see this right now was something only Jesus could walk one through. As I ate, I thought, how could I be seeing this funeral today and having my uncle's funeral the next day? I needed a break from home and all that I was going through, but a funeral was not a break. I called June, but she didn't answer. I said, I'm not going on a trip. She called back. I said, hey, sis, we have a 2-hour delay in Los Angeles. She said, it's the fog, huh? I said, yes, ma'am, it is. I told my sister everything as it went. She asked if I had a mask in the airport because they said that this coronavirus was real. She said, and you are pregnant. I said, yes, sister. We made it on the plane to San Francisco 2 hours later. The flight wasn't bad. The sky was clear. Thank God. And now we just landed in San Francisco. I called June and she didn't answer. I said, this is not the time to not answer the phone. I looked down at my feet and I had on Uggs. I said, it is hot out here. And I brought no other shoes. In St. Louis, it was snowing in February. And in San Francisco, it was like summer in February. I decided to call my Aunt Pat just in case I needed to catch a BART. She said, hi, Alita. I said, hi, Aunt Pat. She said, where are you? I said, in San Francisco waiting on June. She said, I expected you earlier. I said, the fog delayed us. She said, oh, I understand. I just got done watching Kobe's funeral, and I'm glad that they mentioned all the names of the other 7 people. I said, me too. Aunt Pat said, Alita. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, I need to tell you something. I said, what's that? She said, your father looks bad. I said, what do you mean? She said, it means that you need to prepare yourself. I didn't expect that. We got off the phone. I waited 45 minutes at the airport until June finally showed up. She stopped and got out and helped me with my bags. I gave her a hug. When I sat in the car, I asked her why she was so late and why she didn't answer the phone knowing I was here. Maui all over again. I said, June said, look, I have a lot of things I have to do, and I moved things around to pick you up, and I'm not done. I still have stuff to do. I said, I understand all of that, but none of that should have stopped you from answering my phone call. June continued to try to defend herself. I said, don't worry about it. It's all good. I'm here now. June started speeding to get to her son, to take him to the rec center, and then to the nail shop in Fairfield. I started holding my belly and praying for protection as she went in and out of traffic. With no fear, we made it to the nail shop. June paid for both of us to get our pedicures, and my niece got her hands painted. Getting my feet done felt amazing. It made me feel special. I was with my sister and niece, and I didn't get to see them every day. This was June's second time seeing me pregnant. Aunt Pat called. She asked where I was. Jesus, I forgot to let her know June finally picked me up. I apologized. She said everyone's at Uncle Reggie's house, including your dad. I asked if my dad was staying with her son. She said no, he has been staying at your uncle's house. I said, why would he do that? She said, and in his room. I asked, whose room? Uncle Reggie's actual bedroom? She said, yes. I said, I'm not ready for this. Lord, what am I walking into? I said, I love you, Auntie. She said, I love you too, niece. We drove back to Vallejo to June's house. I said, June, I feel sick. She said, I got you. We got our medication and we both went to sleep. I woke up with my phone blowing up. I answered. It was my dad asking me where I was. I said, June's house. I'm leaving now. I woke up and asked June to have her drive me over there. She said she would drop me off because she was on call and tired. I understood that. Even though it was a funeral, June ran crazy all day like I did at home. I was actually shocked. We were more alike than I thought. June and I got in the car and headed to Uncle Reggie's. I said to June, I wonder how it's going to feel walking in the house. Uncle Reggie's house was the same house that Grandma owned and left it to Uncle Reggie when she passed away. I said, June, Grandma paid Seth and I $20 a day to paint the inside of the house right before Uncle Reggie moved in. June said, Grandma always kept y'all busy like that, including all of Uncle Reggie's kids. I said, Grandma owned 2 houses in Vallejo, California, and both of them are on Magazine Street. We passed the 7-Eleven that had always been there. Coming off the highway, I saw Safeway. I said, I am shocked to see them. We don't have Safeway in Illinois or St. Louis. She said, y'all don't? I said, no, ma'am. We were going up the hill. I said, I see why they call this the hillside of Vallejo. All these hills. June arrived right in front of the house, and it was packed. The music was loud. June and I walked up to the house. I saw a lot of people I didn't know outside. We walked through the security gate, which led to the kitchen. I stepped in and saw my brother Seth. All my cousins, all at the same time, screamed, Alita, and hugged me. They touched my belly and said, wow. I hugged them all tight. I saw Shiloh, and she hugged me tight. I looked at Shiloh. I had never seen with a drink as an adult. She was a hooper, not an alcoholic. I saw my brother tooting behind her, just as drunk as her. I couldn't judge anyone. I prayed and asked God to keep my brother alive, Seth came and hugged me and said, "Hey, sis." I said, "Hey, bro." I sat down and my cousin said, "Your dad is in the back in Uncle Reggie's room." I said, "Okay." I stayed sitting down. I wasn't ready to walk in my uncle's room. He just passed away. I still couldn't figure out why my dad would be sleeping in there. If anything, I expect one of his children to be sleeping in their father's room. All of my cousins were looking at pictures of us when we were younger. I saw Ramona, Uncle Reggie's life partner. I hugged her so tight. It was hard to watch this mighty woman of God cry. She drove our uncle to the hospital, and he passed in the car. She was there for his last breath, and while he was alive, she took care of him. Ramona was a very strong woman, and it takes a strong woman to be able to handle Uncle Reggie. Speaking of eating, I said, "Seth, what are you eating?" He said, "One of the prep meals Ramona made for Uncle Reggie. Alita, you should try one. Ramona has at least 40 meals in there." I said, "Who cooked all of that?" He said, "She did." I said, "She really loved Uncle Reggie." She looked lost, trying to smile through the tears. Watching her sit in the house that she had been taken care of for the past 10 years, I started praying. Tears started forming. This was tough. Even being in this house, Grandma's house, this was also like a piece of my grandmother. After all, Uncle was her firstborn son, and everyone in the room was talking. I just looked around the house. It looked so different, but it was still Grandma's house. I missed Grandma. The baby kicked me. I said, "Hey, little man." I continued to look at all of Uncle Reggie's VCR tapes and books that he studied. He had a lot of books. There were thousands of them. No joke. My mind got interrupted when Shiloh showed me a picture of us when we went to Philly. I said, "That is the picture when Uncle Michael took us to the Bronx to visit our cousin, your sister Mia. And we played basketball in the Bronx." I love New York. I looked at Shiloh and thought, is it that Uncle Michael and Auntie Lauren are rich and very successful? How is it that she's an alcoholic? I do not know what happened to her, because I'm starting to understand addiction. People don't choose to get addicted, and I know alcoholism runs in the family. I hugged her, Seth, and Kel. Kel was Uncle Reggie's only daughter. He had 2 other boys. She was a basketball star too. I promise you. Kel was supposed to go pro like Shiloh was. I had game, but Kel was supposed to go into the WNBA. She was going to get it. Kel was my butterfly baby. Seth said, "Come on, sis." He took me to Uncle Reggie's room. My dad was sitting on the bed. Yes, Uncle Reggie's bed. I didn't know why. This was making me mad. I wanted to say, "We are burying him tomorrow. Why are you in his bed?" But it was his brother. I know my aunt warned me and said that my dad was not in good shape. But I wasn't ready. I saw my dad had gained a lot of weight. He was the heaviest I ever seen him in my life. I gave my dad a long hug. The way we hugged just made me feel like my dad really needed me there. After we hugged, my dad said, "I see you brought someone with you." He looked handsome with all his salt and pepper hair. He said, "Sit down." I sat on Uncle Reggie's bed. Tears followed. I saw my dad had a lot of medications, and I saw he was drinking as well. He said, "My brother is gone." That hurt. One of the main reasons I came was to be here for my daddy. I started praying that my brother and my dad would stay peaceful in Jesus' name. Coming home to California wasn't easy. I was in the same state as my mom, and she still hasn't talked to me. I continued to observe all the meds my dad started handing me. My dad said he had gout. He said, "I also have a disc in my neck that can be only fixed by surgery." I looked at his hands and feet. I asked if they hurt. He said, "My feet and hands are numb." He moved his hands around. I listened to him talk. As tired as I was, it was nice just to sit with my dad. I got up and looked around Uncle Reggie's room. I saw his $100 to $500 hats. He had three-piece suits with the shoes to match, cufflinks, and the hat to match with a beautiful feather that normally matched his socks. Even though Uncle Reggie was the cleanest coach anyone had ever seen, he even matched the team's color. Every sport he coached, his children played on the team. Uncle Reggie was a clean man. Basketball, baseball, football, soccer, every picture in his room was with trophies. Coach Carter didn't lose. I sat back down just for a second and my father said, "I'm going to get in trouble tomorrow." I said, "Dad, what does that mean?" He said, "Let's just say your great aunt told me not to do something and you know me. I do what I want to do. I need a favor from you. I need you to record my set." I said, "Record? Dad, I can't say that I would be capable of holding a phone steady while I'm crying." He said, "Well, I will have it figured out." I gave my dad a hug. Whatever my dad was getting ready to do, Jesus help us. If Aunt Pat said no, then he had lost his mind going against Aunt Pat. Aunt Pat was 4'10" and was highly respected in the family. I prayed for my father, knowing going against her. I walked back in the living room. Most of the people left. I looked in the grandma memory box one more time. I admired seeing the photos she kept of all three of her sons' family. My grandmother, that pretty lady, loved her family. How Uncle Reggie even had this box amazed me. No one knew Grandma had it, let alone Uncle Reggie had it. I was not ready for tomorrow. June said, "You ready?" I said, "Yes." We both hugged our cousins. We made it back to her house. And I said, "Your house looks like no kids live here." She said, "I know, I'm OCD." I looked around. White bar stools, glass mirrors, sand seashells everywhere. This child had taste, just as I expected her to. Her house reminded me of Maui. You went from Vallejo, California, outside of her house, then inside of her house was Maui. I said, "Is that the TV Seth put on the wall for you?" She said, "Yes, and I had to pay for it." I said, "Seth charged you?" She said, "Yes." I said, "I learned through the years that Seth does a lot of stuff on principle and respect. He is super good at cutting you off." June said, "Don't owe him any money, honey." I said, "I know, because he will do it one or two ways. He will tell you, 'I got you,' but don't make this a habit. And second, if you don't pay him back in time, he feels that he will send you a text and tell you to keep it and make sure you never call him for money again." He got that from Uncle Reggie. Your best bet is to pay Seth back without him calling you before you get blocked. My sister and I started watching a movie together while my nephew Cyrus had cleaned his room for me and put fresh, clean sheets on the bed. My nephew, who doesn't listen to my sister, June, came into the living room and said, "The bed is ready for you." He doesn't clean up for me, but for his auntie, fresh everything. Cyrus started smiling from ear to ear. I got into bed and went to sleep. My niece Alexis was sleeping in my sister's bed, and my nephew was on the couch watching movies in the living room. I went to my nephew, who was 3 days apart from my son, and said goodnight. I looked at him the way I did my son. My sister had 5 kids, and they all pulled on her. She was only one person. I prayed that all my nieces and nephews had an encounter with Jesus and let them see their mom the way God did. My sister was stronger than I could ever imagine, and she may not see Jesus right next to her, but I did. I got in the bed and thanked God for allowing me to make it in and asked for strength for tomorrow. I kept hearing strength in my spirit. My great aunt Pat said, "Life is not promised, but death surely is." I knew I was in deep sleep because I woke up thinking of her. Then I looked at my phone. I had missed calls from my dad, my brother, my husband, and my Aunt Pat. I said, "Good morning, Jesus." The phone rang. It was Seth. He said, "You dressed?" I said, "Dressed." He said he was talking real fast. He said, "Yes, dressed." As in, we have to be at the funeral at 10 a.m. I said, Seth, it's 9 a.m. and the funeral is at 11 a.m. He said, what do you have on? I said, my husband's boxers and a t-shirt. He said, oh, you just woke up. I said, yes, Seth. He said, well, I expected for you to be ready, so answer the door. I said, you're here? I went to the door and Seth was clean from head to toe. Speaking of heads, he had on one of Uncle Reggie's hats, and I said, nice hat. He said, I know, right? It goes with my whole outfit. It's a sign of respect. How's Alita? I said, how's Seth? He pulled out a shot of gin and drank it and said, Seth is good. My mouth started to water, and I started to become nauseous. I went to June's backyard and let the meds do their job. Seth followed, and before the meds could take effect, I threw up. He said, it's that bad? I said, yes. This was his first time seeing me pregnant, let alone sick. He said, all right, do you feel better? I said, yes. Then he said, so get dressed. I said, okay, Seth, give me a minute. I put on the colors that were requested. I said, do you think we should take the kids to the funeral? Seth said, no, June is at work and she would normally leave them at home, so they'll be fine. I called little Cyrus and I said, you better feed your sister. And I stopped. I said, do you want to go to Uncle Reggie's funeral at a church? Cyrus said, no, ma'am. Seth said, on top of that, I have a pickup truck. So where would they sit? I have all my tree climbing tools in the bed of the truck. He pulled out another shot and it was gone. I said, Jesus, he can't be driving me and the baby. I said, how far is the funeral? He said, the high school is right up the street. I said, high school? He said, Vallejo High. I called Aunt Pat and asked where the funeral was. She said, at Corpus Field at Vallejo High. Kel, his only daughter, wanted to have it there. Aunt Pat said she felt like it would be appropriate since he was a coach all year around. She said, what better way to go than the way he lived? He lived on the field. I said, yes, ma'am. I put Vallejo High in the GPS. Seth said, I don't need no GPS. Yo, sis, your shoes look hot. I said, I could only take one pair. And before I could explain, he said, say less. We pulled up to the school. We didn't see where to go. I said, is this the funeral? We looked at the people walking in from the parking lot across the street. Seth and I got out. I said, I didn't know there would be this many people. Seth said Uncle Reggie was the man. He knew everyone in Vallejo. I said, yes, but this is just family that I see. And I see all the family got the memo. All shades of beautiful purple. Then I saw the prettiest little lady. It was my great Aunt Pat. She hugged me. I said, Auntie, this is a family reunion. Family came from all over the world for Uncle Reggie. I thought, what a life he had, because we hadn't all been together since Grandma was alive. My great uncles, all my cousins, everybody hugged. There was so much love. Not only had no one seen me, but to be pregnant at our uncle's funeral. I'd never seen my father, my brother, and myself in the same space. I started praying for help from the Lord because Seth just took another shot. He and my father were just alike, and they both were doing good so far. I saw my Princess Kale. She gave me a hug and said to me, cousin, I need a minute to get my speech together. It was her father. I understood. We continued to take pictures and hug. I hadn't seen my dad yet. As we were getting ready to walk over to Corpus Field, my brother said, you ready? We are going. I saw all of our family members, and I said, I'm ready. We had a squad. There was at least 80 of us. It was supposed to start at 11 a.m. Seth disappeared, and I saw Seth pull in the same parking lot as the rest of the family. But he almost hit a family member with his broken down truck. I said, how many funerals will we have today? As soon as he parked, I went to get my stuff out the truck. Shiloh scared the crap out of me when she reached on my side of the truck and said I was looking for this. Clear as day, it was a beer can. Between her and Seth, I am not doing this today. We saw everyone starting to cross the street. Seth said, come on, Alita. We have to get my work tools in the front of the truck to lock it up. He said, where do you think this crap is? Over $3,000 worth of tree cutting equipment. I never said crap. I said, but okay, come on. I helped him move as fast as I could. I could lock up my flat iron shears and products, so I understood. Auntie put all of us in our place quickly. She yelled, it's time to cross the street.